I thought my dad's police badge was my ultimate trump card. Instead, it bought me 30 days in jail, and the sight of my father, Captain Hayes, turning his back as they cuffed me. The silence in the courtroom was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that smothered every cough and shuffle. It was thicker than the stale air, which smelled of old paper and cheap floor wax. I sat at the defendant's table, my suit feeling like a cheap costume I'd borrowed for a play I never wanted to be in. My lawyer, a man whose name I could barely remember, kept patting my shoulder in a way that was supposed to be reassuring, but just felt condescending. Across the room I could feel my father's gaze burning into the back of my head. I didn't dare turn around to look at him. I already knew what I'd see. Captain Thomas Hayes, a man carved from granite and duty, his face a mask of cold, professional disappointment. The same disappointment he'd worn since the night it all happened. It had started, as most of my mistakes did, with me trying to be someone I wasn't. Me, my buddy Liam, and his cousin Sarah were coming back from a concert, packed into my slightly too old for me BMW. I was driving, music thumping, showing off a little on the empty suburban roads. I was taking a corner a bit too fast, the tires squealing a satisfying protest, when the world behind me exploded in a flash of red and blue. My heart plummeted into my stomach. A speeding ticket was one thing, but a speeding ticket with my dad as the precinct captain. That was a lecture I didn't want to hear for the 10th time. "Just pull over, Jake," Liam said, his voice suddenly sober. "Be cool, it's no big deal." But it felt like a very big deal. The officer who approached the window was young, probably not much older than me. He had that rigid, by-the-book posture that screamed, "Rookie." He wasn't going to be charmed or sweet-talked. He asked for my license and registration, his flashlight beam cutting across my face. As I fumbled in the glove compartment, my fingers brushed against the cool, worn leather of my dad's spare wallet, and inside it, I knew, was his badge. He'd left it in my car by accident after we'd gone to a department charity event a few weeks back. An idea, a terrible, stupid, magnificent idea, sparked in the panic-addled soup of my brain. This wasn't just a get-out-of-jail-free card. It was the ultimate trump card. The officer took my documents and was heading back to his cruiser when my ego, inflated by the watchful eyes of my friends, took over. "Officer, wait!" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. He turned, one eyebrow raised. I leaned out the window, holding up the wallet, flipping it open to the gleam of gold-plated metal. "Look, my dad is Captain Hayes," I said, trying to sound casual, like I was letting him in on a friendly secret. "Maybe we can just, forget this happened." The change in the officer's demeanor was instantaneous. The bored professionalism vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. He stalked back to my car, his eyes narrowed. He didn't even glance at the badge. He looked straight at me. "Is that your shield, sir?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "Well, no, it's my dad's," I stammered, the confidence draining out of me like air from a punctured tire. "He's the captain. So you're flashing a shield that doesn't belong to you to get out of a speeding ticket?" He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Are you a police officer?" "No, but—" "Then put that away before I add impersonating an officer to the list of charges." My blood ran cold. This wasn't going the way it did in the movies. This wasn't how it was supposed to work. The officer went back to his car, and when he returned it was with 2 tickets. One for speeding and another for reckless driving. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came the next morning, when my father summoned me to his study. He didn't yell. He never yelled. He just sat behind his mahogany desk, the actual badge sitting in front of him, and looked at me with those glacial blue eyes. "You didn't just disrespect the law, Jacob," he said, his voice flat. "You disrespected me. You disrespected every officer serving under me. You used this," he tapped the badge, "as a toy, a get-out-of-trouble pass. Well, the pass is revoked. He told me he'd spoken to the officer. He'd spoken to the DA. He wasn't going to fix this. I was going to court, and I was going to face the consequences alone, which led me here, to this suffocating room, my future in the hands of a man famous for his compassion, Judge Frank Caprio. I'd watched his show, Caught in Providence. I'd seen him let people go for parking tickets when they shared a story of hardship. I'd seen him show mercy. A flicker of hope ignited within me. Maybe he'd see I was just a stupid kid who made a mistake. My lawyer finished his weak closing statement, mumbling something about youthful indiscretion. The prosecutor laid out the facts coldly and efficiently, emphasizing the abuse of authority, the inherent disrespect shown to law enforcement. Then there was only silence. Judge Caprio leaned back in his high-backed chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. He read the police report silently, his eyes scanning the page. He looked at the young officer who'd pulled me over, sitting in the front row. He looked over at my father, whose face remained a stoic, unreadable mask. Finally, his gaze, heavy with the weight of decades on the bench, settled on me. It felt like he was looking straight through my cheap suit and into my pathetic, terrified soul. The silence stretched for an eternity. "Mr. Hayes," Judge Caprio's voice finally boomed, calm yet powerful, cutting through the tension like a knife. He paused, letting my name hang in the air. "Stand up." I shakily rose to my feet, my knees feeling like they were about to buckle. He looked from me to my father, then back to me, a thoughtful, almost sad expression on his face. "Your father is a good man, a respected man in this community. He has dedicated his life to upholding the very laws you thought were beneath you." He let that sink in before he continued, his tone shifting, becoming harder, sharper. "What you did was not just a youthful indiscretion. It was an act of profound arrogance, an insult to the uniform your father wears with honor." He picked up his gavel but didn't bang it. He just held it. He looked at the officer, then at my father, and finally his gaze settled on me, piercing and absolute. "Mr. Hayes," he began, his voice echoing in the sudden, tomb-like silence. "I've heard the testimony. I've reviewed your record, and I have made my decision." The gavel in his hand seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds, a small wooden judge of my fate. My own heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a chaotic rhythm in the crushing silence. I braced myself. A fine, a big one, probably a few $1,000s. License suspension for sure. 6 months? A year? Maybe some mandatory traffic school or community service, something embarrassing where I'd have to pick up trash on the highway while my friends drove by and laughed. It would suck. It would be a pain. But it would be over. I could handle that. Judge Caprio didn't look at my father. He looked right at me, and his eyes, which had always seemed so kind and grandfatherly on television, were now filled with a piercing gravity. "In this courtroom, I see people from all walks of life," he said, his voice resonating with quiet authority. "Poor people, rich people, people who have made terrible mistakes, and people who were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. The one thing that must remain constant, Mr. Hayes, the one thing that holds it all together, is respect for the law. Not as a concept, but as a living, breathing compact we all make with each other to live in a civil society." He gestured vaguely toward the front row. "That young officer you flashed your father's badge at, he was doing his job. A difficult, often thankless job. And you, in a moment of breathtaking arrogance, decided that his job, his duty, and the law he represents did not apply to you. Why? Because of your last name. Because of the metal and leather in your father's wallet." He leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly but losing none of its power. "That badge isn't a family heirloom, son. It isn't a backstage pass to life. It is a symbol of public trust, a trust your father has spent a lifetime earning. And you used it to try and get out of a speeding ticket." My mouth was dry. The room felt like it was closing in. This was more than just a lecture. This was a dissection. He was pulling apart my entire stupid, entitled worldview for everyone to see. I risked a glance at my lawyer, who was just staring down at his legal pad, doodling little circles, completely useless. I didn't dare look at my dad. "So, we have the matter of the speeding and the reckless driving," Caprio continued, picking up a piece of paper. "For those infractions, you will pay the maximum fine of $1,500. Your driver's license will be suspended for a period of 1 year. You will also be required to complete 200 hours of community service." I felt a dizzying wave of relief. It was steep. $1,500 was almost all I had saved. A year without a license was social suicide. 200 hours of service was a whole summer down the drain. But it wasn't jail. I wouldn't have a criminal record. I could survive this. I nodded numbly, ready to accept. "Yes, Your Honor," I managed to croak out. Judge Caprio looked at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "We're not finished, Mr. Hayes." The relief that had flooded my system moments before turned instantly to ice. "Those are the penalties for your driving, but we still have the matter of your conduct. The act of using your father's position to place yourself above the law." He put the paper down and folded his hands, looking directly at me. The courtroom held its breath. "There is no fine I can levy that will teach you the lesson you need to learn. There is no community service that can instill the humility you so profoundly lack. He paused, letting the words hang in the dead air. Therefore, for the contempt you've shown for the rule of law and for the office your father so honorably holds, I am sentencing you to serve 30 days in the adult correctional institution. The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds. 30 days. ACI. Jail. Then the room exploded in a collective gasp. My lawyer shot to his feet. Your Honor, if I may, that's grossly disproportionate. He's a college student. He has no prior. Your objection is noted and overruled, Counselor. Sit down, Caprio said, his voice like iron. He banged the gavel once, a sharp final crack that echoed like a gunshot. This court is adjourned. My knees gave out and I sank back into my chair, my mind a screaming void of white noise. 30 days. Jail. Me. It couldn't be happening. Through the haze, I saw the bailiff, a big, imposing man with a weary face, starting to walk around the table towards me. Panic, pure and primal, seized me. My eyes darted across the room, past the shocked faces of strangers, past the rookie cop who looked as stunned as I was, and landed on my father. He was still sitting perfectly straight, but his mask had finally broken. His face was pale, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle was twitching in his cheek. His eyes weren't angry or disappointed anymore. They were just empty. "Dad," I whispered, the sound getting lost in the shuffle of people leaving. "Dad, please." The bailiff was beside me now, his hand gently but firmly on my shoulder. "Son, you need to stand up." My eyes were locked on my father, pleading, begging him to do something, to say something, to be the captain, to fix this. For a single, agonizing second, our eyes met. I saw a flicker of conflict, a storm of emotion behind his frozen expression. Then, he deliberately turned his head and stared at the empty witness stand, refusing to look at me. The bailiff's hand tightened on my shoulder. "Let's go, son," he said, pulling out a pair of steel handcuffs. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a door slamming shut on my life, a cold, metallic finality that vibrated up my arms and settled deep in my bones. The bailiff led me through a side door, away from the courtroom gallery and my father's stony profile. The world narrowed to the scuffed linoleum floor and the broad back of the man in front of me. Every step echoed in the sterile hallway, a slow, shameful march. My mind was a carousel of terror, flashing images of prison cells from movies, of hulking figures and cold steel bars. Me? In there. It was a category error, a cosmic mistake. I was Jake Hayes, Captain Hayes' son. I went to frat parties, not prison. The processing was a humiliating blur of fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic. I was stripped of my suit, my watch, my phone, my identity. They were replaced with a faded orange jumpsuit that smelled of bleach and despair, and a pair of thin plastic slides. I was fingerprinted, my hands feeling clumsy and foreign as an officer rolled each digit in black ink. The mugshot was the worst part. The flashbulb went off, capturing my face. Pale, terrified, my eyes wide with a dawning horror that felt permanent. I was no longer a person. I was an inmate number. The first night in the holding cell was the longest of my life. I was thrown in with a dozen other men, a rough-looking collection of faces etched with anger, resignation, or a frightening, hollow emptiness. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and fear. I found a corner of the concrete floor and made myself as small as possible, wrapping my arms around my knees, trying to disappear. Every cough, every muttered curse, every clang of a distant steel door made me jump. Sleep was impossible. All I could think about was my father, sitting in that courtroom, deliberately turning his head away. The image was burned onto the inside of my eyelids. It was worse than the sentence, worse than the handcuffs. It was the ultimate condemnation. He hadn't just let this happen. He had willed it. He had thrown me to the wolves to teach me a lesson. The days that followed bled into one another, a monotonous cycle of fear and boredom. I kept to myself, head down, avoiding eye contact. I learned the rhythm of the place, the morning head count, the slop they called breakfast, the long, empty hours in the yard where you had to find a spot that wasn't claimed and pray no one noticed you. I saw a fight break out over a stolen packet of ramen noodles. I saw a man get shanked for looking at someone the wrong way. This wasn't some TV show where the protagonist learns a valuable lesson and befriends a wise old convict. This was real. This was a place where weakness was a scent, and I reeked of it. My only connection to the outside world was a single, state-mandated phone call. I knew who I had to call, but my hand trembled as I punched in the number to my father's office. It was his secretary who answered. Captain Hayes's office. "It's Jacob," I said, my voice hoarse. "I need to speak to him." There was a long pause. I could hear muffled talking on the other end. My heart hammered against my ribs. Maybe he'd changed his mind. Maybe he'd realized this was too much. "I'm sorry, Jacob," she finally said, her voice laced with an uncomfortable pity. "The captain is in a meeting. He said he won't be accepting your calls." The line went dead. I stood there, holding the receiver, the dial tone buzzing in my ear like a mocking insect. He wasn't just letting me face the consequences. He had cut me off completely. The last thread of hope I'd been clinging to snapped. I was truly, utterly alone. The anger that had been simmering beneath the fear began to boil. Anger at myself, at the judge, but most of all, at my father. How could he do this? How could he throw his own son away like this? A week turned into 2. I got tougher, or at least I learned to act like it. I developed a permanent scowl. I learned to walk with a purpose, to stare straight ahead. I learned to eat the slop without gagging and to sleep through the shouting and the weeping. I was changing, becoming someone I didn't recognize. The pampered college kid was being stripped away, layer by layer, replaced by something hard and cold. On the 21st day, something broke the routine. During the afternoon head count, my inmate number was called. My stomach lurched. This was never good. It meant a shakedown, a disciplinary hearing, or worse. A guard led me not to an interrogation room, but to the visitor's center. I walked into the small cubicle, my heart pounding a frantic, confused rhythm. Through the thick, scratched plexiglass, a man was sitting on the other side. It wasn't my father. It was my lawyer, the useless one who just doodled on his notepad. He looked tired and rumpled, and he was holding a thick manila envelope. "Jake," he said, picking up the phone receiver on his side. I picked up mine. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice flat. "Did my dad finally send you to tell me to rot in here?" He ignored the sarcasm. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice urgent. "There's been a development. It's about the night you were arrested. About the officer who pulled you over." He slid a photograph from the envelope and pressed it against the glass. It was a grainy security camera still, time-stamped from that night. It showed the officer's patrol car parked behind my BMW on the side of the road. My investigator pulled the dash cam and body cam footage. There are discrepancies. The official report says he pulled you over at 11:42 p.m. for speeding. But look. He pointed a finger at a detail I couldn't quite make out. That footage is from a gas station camera, 2 miles from where you were stopped. It shows the officer's car parked there, hidden behind the building, for almost 15 minutes before you ever came down that road. My mind struggled to process what the lawyer was saying. Discrepancies. Hidden. Waiting for me. It didn't make sense. Why would a cop set me up for a simple speeding ticket? The lawyer must have seen the confusion on my face because he slid another document against the glass. It was a page from a personnel file. The name on it was Officer Daniel Miller. And below it, in the section for family members also in law enforcement, was another name, Sergeant Frank Miller, listed as terminated. My investigator dug deep, the lawyer said, his voice a low, intense murmur through the phone. Frank Miller was fired by your father 10 years ago. Internal affairs investigation. Corruption, skimming from evidence lockup. Your dad was the one who personally handed him his walking papers. It destroyed the man's career. Daniel was just a kid then. Looks like he never forgot. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening clarity. This was never about a traffic violation. I wasn't a random target. I was the target. Miller had been waiting for me, baiting me, hoping I'd do something stupid, and I, in my infinite arrogance, had walked right into his trap and handed him the perfect weapon, my father's badge. I had given him the means to not only get me, but to humiliate my father in the most public way possible. I wasn't a victim of my own stupidity. I was the pawn in someone else's decade-long vendetta. An emergency hearing was scheduled for the next day. I was escorted back into the same courtroom, wearing the same orange jumpsuit. This time, the room was buzzing. My father was there, sitting in the front row, but today he looked smaller. The iron mask was gone, replaced by a gray, haunted expression. His eyes found mine as I sat down, and for the first time in a month, I didn't see a captain. I saw my dad, and he looked broken. Officer Miller was there too, standing with a prosecutor I didn't recognize. He looked pale and sweaty, his by-the-book posture gone, replaced by a nervous twitch. Judge Caprio entered, his face an unreadable slab of granite. He didn't waste any time, My lawyer presented the evidence, the gas station surveillance video, the timestamp discrepancies, the personnel file of Frank Miller, and finally, a sworn affidavit from another officer in Miller's precinct who'd heard him bragging about getting back at the captain. The prosecutor's case collapsed in on itself. Miller tried to deny it, stammering about coincidence and procedure, but his lies were transparent. Judge Caprio listened to it all, his eyes fixed on the young officer, growing colder and harder with every word. When Miller finally fell silent, the judge turned his gaze not to him, but to me. "Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the room, "the evidence is clear. You were the victim of a malicious and calculated setup. This court was presented with a false narrative. In light of this, I am immediately vacating the remainder of your sentence." A wave of gasps and murmurs went through the room. The bailiff behind me stepped back. I was free. But before I could even process the relief, Judge Caprio held up a hand for silence. "However," he continued, his eyes boring into me, "let me ask you a question. Had Officer Miller not had this vendetta, had this been a legitimate traffic stop as we all believed it to be, was your conduct that night acceptable?" The old me would have seized the moment basking in the vindication. But 21 days in a concrete box had burned the old me away. I thought of the fear, the humiliation, the utter loneliness. I thought of my father turning his face away. I rose slowly to my feet. "No, Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and steady. "It wasn't. What Officer Miller did was wrong. But what I did was also wrong. I was arrogant, I was disrespectful, and I used my father's name and his honor like it was my own personal property. I was an easy target because I acted like a fool. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry to the court, and to him." I glanced at my father. He was staring at me, his eyes wide with surprise, and something else, something that looked like pride. Judge Caprio nodded slowly, a flicker of his televised compassion returning to his face. "It seems 30 days was not the sentence you were given, but it may have been the lesson you needed. You are free to go, Mr. Hayes. I trust you will not appear before me again." He then turned his attention to Miller, and his voice became pure ice. "Officer Miller, you are a disgrace to your uniform. You have perverted the course of justice for a petty, personal vendetta. I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for immediate criminal investigation for perjury and official misconduct. Bailiff, take this man into custody." Leaving the courthouse was surreal. The sunlight felt unnaturally bright. The air tasted clean. My father was waiting for me just outside the doors, holding the cheap suit I'd been arrested in. We didn't speak as I changed in the men's room, shedding the orange jumpsuit like a dead skin. The walk to his car was silent and heavy with everything unsaid. We were halfway home before he finally spoke, his eyes fixed on the road. "Jacob," he started, his voice thick with emotion, "when I heard what that officer did, what I let him do to you, I was so focused on the principle, on the integrity of the badge, that I completely failed you as a father. I turned my back on you when you needed me most. I am so sorry." A tear traced a path down his weathered cheek. "I made it easy for you, Dad," I said, looking at the passing houses. "I was everything you despise. Entitled, reckless, disrespectful. You did what you thought was right." He shook his head, pulling the car over to the side of the road. He turned to face me, his blue eyes, so much like my own, shining with unshed tears. "It wasn't right. It was rigid. It was proud. It wasn't my job to be your judge and jury. It was my job to be your father. I failed. Can you forgive me?" In that moment, all the anger and bitterness I'd harbored for the last month just washed away. I saw the immense weight he carried, the impossible line he walked every day, and I saw the man who had taught me to ride a bike and bait a hook. "There's nothing to forgive," I said. And for the first time since that terrible night, we weren't captain and delinquent. We were just father and son. The road ahead was long, but for the first time it felt like we were finally driving in the same direction.